Welcome everybody. Back here at Ayurvedic Astrology, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. Today I have with us Neeshee Pandit, who also recently did a video on Corey Dowd's channel. IhaveTheVeda.com, you can find it. That's his website, Corey Dowd's website. We're going to be looking at Ayurveda, astrology, and psychology today. A few things that I wanted to make announcements about. Many of you have asked about the continuation of the series of the planets related to each ascendant. I do plan on getting back to that here in a month or two as things settle down. Also, those of you who are interested, you've asked me about the Astrological Apprenticeship Program, which begins every year. So we'll have a new year beginning in 2019. If you want more information about that, you can find it at AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, and you can go to the Astrological Apprenticeship tab on that website for more information. It's limited to 25 students, and we're already halfway full roster beginning 2019. Also in the works, potentially, Neeshee and I, maybe around November or December, are going to do a class together on Ayurveda and astrology to go a little more in-depth with astrology and Ayurveda, and also to give you the information to help you have a good, solid background information on how to see Ayurvedic influences within the chart. So anyway, that said, welcome Neeshee.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, good. In previous talks, we've looked at the moon a lot in regards to how that affects a person's temperament and their emotions. So now we've got Neeshee here, who's specifically focused on Ayurveda. So when you're looking at the moon and you're considering things like the psychology of an individual, how do you approach that, and what do you see within the chart with the moon?
Well, I think you can just start by looking at the moon itself. Mm-hmm. You know, how healthy is the moon? How strong is the moon? How well is it placed? So I'm going to look at Shatbala for the moon. I'm going to look at Avashtas on the moon, good and bad. I'm going to look at dignity of the moon. I'm also going to check moon in the Vargas, right? I just want to get his overall sense of the moon. How is the moon operating in this person's charts?
And I mean, we've talked about it, but from your perspective, why focus on the moon for this?
Because the moon is our consciousness. You know, the moon is consciousness. The moon is the mind, the emotions, the reflected aspect of ourselves. You know, what we experience as an individual is a reflection, you know, of something that is spiritual in nature. So just like the moon is reflecting the light of the sun, if we take the sun as spirit or soul, right, or the divine, the moon is the agency through which we are experiencing ourselves, our subjectivity, the world around us, how we're relating to it, how it's coming into us, how we're connecting with it. And the moon governs the flow of life energy too. You know, we say that the moon governs the flow of the fluids in the body, and so it has this really important role in terms of life, you know, living life. And
so when you see the moon, then you're getting a sense of how the person perceives the world or how they interact with the world?
Both.
Okay.
I think that it's both, you know, because that's why the moon is the mind and the emotions. Because on the one hand, it's a mental attitude too. It's a mental disposition. You know, how are they viewing the world? You know?
Well, a lot of people look at Mercury for mental disposition.
Sure.
I can kind of see why they do that, but you know, Mercury being more of like the intellect.
Yeah.
Put things together. So what's the difference there?
Well, I see Mercury as having that more discriminative function with the intellect. You know, it's using intellect to discern between things.
So it's not necessarily more personality based. It's more just how they are using that tool of the intellect.
Right. Okay. Exactly. Okay. Whereas the moon is not really intellect, so to speak. It's more, you know, manas, or the sense mind. How is the person interacting with the world in terms of their disposition relative to it? You know, which is a mental thing. You know, and that's going to govern how they feel about everything. Then certain experiences come into them, as life does. How do they respond to that? You know, the moon governs how we respond to things, how we adapt to things, the stressors of life, the changes of life. How does a person renew themselves in the midst of that? So life is hugely governed by moon.
Right. So when you, you know, when you're working with someone in an Ayurvedic capacity,
sure,
since you're an astrologer, you check out their moon as well. What information do you get from the moon that helps you work better with certain clients?
Well, I can really see from a person's moon a certain capacity, I could say. You know, it's how much stress does this person really, are they not able to buffer? You know, and Saturn has something to do with that too, in a way. But in terms of moon, I see it as this person really struggles to renew themselves in the midst of like the changing landscapes of life. And when stressors come on them, they're struggling to like get their life force back. You know, they're really kind of, they're not flowing that well.
What would be an example of something that you would see influencing the moon that might make you see someone who struggles in that way?
Moon Saturn.
Okay.
Moon Saturn, you know, through shared lordship, through conjunction, through aspect. That's one of the number one.
And how does that play out? Like, what is like? How might they act? What's
Well, Saturn is this limiting, constricting force, right? And the moon is supposed to be this open receptacle, you know, to life energy, and that's a flowing process. But Saturn is much more trying to get on top of all of that and survive and navigate its way through the challenges of life, really scared, right? So a lot of fear is coming through Saturn. So with Moon Saturn, I see that the flow gets shut down. You know, the person feels like, well, a lot of things, you know, it's like a garden hose metaphor, you know, it's like, well, dirty water can come out and good water can come out, but the best thing is just to kink the hose because it's just not safe, you know, just forget the water. So now they're starving, you know, they have no nourishment. So a person gets more and more shut down, more and more closed off. At the same time, they're looking for nourishment. They're thirsty. They want the water, you know, but they don't trust that it's safe enough to be open to get it. So they end up being in this situation with life where they have a lot of need to get something out of life, but they're not open to getting it. So the moon has got them kind of shut down. You know, there's like a wall.
And that's specific, it's like Saturn moon.
That's how I see Saturn moon.
And so when you're working with someone, because there are a lot of people who have Saturn moon conjunctions.
Sure. And at different degrees of it, I'm describing a generality, of course.
How do you work with, like, what do you say to them, or how do you, because what I found with Saturn moon is that oftentimes they're also shut down to hearing things about saying be more optimistic and being more accepting. So how do you get through that? Or do you get through that?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, sometimes you don't, you know, and part of my approach to it is just to say to them, and I can feel the person a little bit, I mean, how available they are to it, how much they've noticed that in themselves. Even some people have. And you say that to some people, and they're like, yeah, you know, I really suffer that. And it's like, okay, good, you know, you're really aware of this. But for some people, it's like, wow, you just described something about me that makes sense, you know, but I've never realized it before. And to me, it's like, okay, good. You know, I'm just going to say, be open to that. You know, just consider that more in your life. Like, be open to feeling things more. Be open to just being vulnerable in life, and that being a means for gaining nourishment.
Even if it's pain.
Even if it's pain. That's what I tell people basically, is that what the moon is teaching us is the need to be vulnerable. That you can only get what you need in life by being vulnerable. And the bad stuff comes in too, so to speak. But that's part of how you get the good.
Well, you know, in the Gita, they do talk about that pleasure and pain and fear and death and all the good things are God as well.
Exactly.
You know, and there's you've heard me mention this many times, the book The Presence Process by Michael Brown. It's a process that I've recommended for Saturn moon individuals that essentially gets them in tune with that feeling sense, and it allows them to hopefully accept it in some odd way as like a gift. And by doing that, they get through it. There was a video I watched with Michael Brown. He was describing when you go through this process, if you're in a very painful place or a painful situation, it feels like that pain is never ending, like it will always be that way. But if you're able to sit with it and welcome it and accept it, it becomes, something happens with that in a very, almost a graceful way. So it sounds like with Saturn moon, from what you're saying, trying to find a way to be open to even the painful things without closing down, shutting down your heart.
Exactly, because that's what's happening, is that constriction, right? So now there's no more life. You're not really living, you know, with Saturn moon. You're not alive, really, in that sense. And so I think another big part of it is that what it's bringing out is something really archetypal, which is that we all have these needs in life that life in and of itself isn't really able to meet for us, because life isn't a satisfying experience in that sense, being so conditional, and we're being here identified as separate beings and so forth. There's all kinds of things going on that actually don't add up in reality. So we're not satisfied beings, you know. So I think Moon Saturn as a gift, I say that to people too, that, you know, this is a gift because you can see that in a way there is no need. There's a need you have that actually can't be satisfied except through something of a spiritual process.
Something beyond
Yeah.
the planets.
Doesn't matter who you're with, what you get in your life. If you go beyond Moon Saturn, just become really open and you're just satisfied with what you have. Even that's not going to be enough. And there's something in Moon Saturn that's aware of that.
Right.
So that's important to get to that level and realize that, look, with Moon Saturn, you actually need to find that spiritual fulfillment.
Right.
Right.
So with the moon, we talk about Moon Saturn, which is a cruel planet, but some of the things I've also seen with the moon is when it's influenced by benefics, particularly Venus comes to mind, but also Jupiter. I love Jupiter-Moon combination.
Yeah.
So you've heard me talk about that a lot, whether it's a transit, whether it's in someone's chart. I really don't have too much to say in any way about that being a bad thing.
Right.
But Venus, when it comes into play, sometimes it can make a person trying to find too much fulfillment in Venetian things.
Right.
And even though it's not Saturn restricting them, it's kind of like always drawing them into a greater sense of, I don't like to use the word delusion, but a greater sense of feeling like they're going to get satisfaction through these things.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you is, with benefic planets, it's obvious with something like Moon Saturn.
Right.
But with benefic planets, how does that influence the psychology of an individual with the moon?
Well, I feel like it's so important to understand what the role of the moon is in that sense. That's when I look at it, when you're thinking about benefic versus a malefic influence, I'm thinking, well, what is the role of Venus, and what is the role of the moon in that sense? And the moon is an internalized process. So if we think of the moon as an internalized process, then Venus is really moving the moon in an externalized consciousness, because Venus is about external things. It's about experiencing the world more. And so the moon can only be satisfied through an internalized realization, So Venus, even though it's this benefic influence, is still contradicting the moon's purpose, the moon's role,
Right. And so what is the moon's role then, more specifically, so people understand what the moon is about versus what Venus does when it's with the moon?
The moon is about finding that inner fulfillment at the level of consciousness, not at the level of things or anything that's externalized at all, at the level of life force itself, So, but Venus is about gaining satisfaction through our interaction with the world, with the things of the world, with externalized forms, with life as it appears to be externalized, objectively. So basically, the moon is a subjective fulfillment, whereas Venus is a fulfillment gained through objective things.
Right.
So that's where there's a contradiction.
And we're not saying that Venus is bad,
right?
Because Venus has a role to play when you're engaged in the objective world.
Exactly.
It's just when the moon, which is meant to be your more internalized consciousness, over-identifies with Venetian things, that it becomes more unhappy in the long run.
That's right.
Like someone who indulges too much in certain things. After a while, that indulgence makes them sick.
That's right.
And then when we think about the moon and Venus, one of the things that I've tried to encourage people to do with that combination is to find some sort of devotional practice, so that they're able to take that moon and direct it using Venus, using that quality of Venus, but to something beyond objective things. So you found that to be...
I find it very useful with Venus in general, but I really like that you're bringing this up about devotion, because I feel like devotion is the connecting factor between Venus and the moon. Because Venus is this, devotion is this internalized process.
Right.
Devotion comes from within,
right?
And Venus, at its higher levels, is about devotion. That highest expression of love, right? So I feel like that's a brilliant way to deal with a Moon-Venus interplay. That's really what it's calling for. So that's interesting, right? That even though it's this benefic influence, that just because of the nature of those planets, it's bringing something else together. That seems contradictory, but at another level, it could be resolved.
Yeah. And one thing, talking with Ernst about this, and hopefully they're not making too much noise downstairs and it's coming through, but one thing that Ernst and I have discussed about this is that oftentimes the moon works well, more so when it's by itself. Now, we're not saying that you can't have good interactions with planets, but
like Moon and Jupiter.
Yeah, right, exactly, Moon and Jupiter. But when the moon is by itself, it's not necessarily getting overly pushed in a certain direction based on these different agendas of the planets. So when we're looking at the moon, what would be a nice balanced moon? Like when you would see the moon in someone's chart, and you say, yeah, that moon is looking strong, that moon is looking healthy. For you, what would that kind of look like? What an example?
I would say good dignity and no starved avashtas.
Right.
That would be the great thing. If it's in Taurus, that's even better, you know? But not necessarily have to be like at his exaltation or Mula Trikona. It's just in a friend's sign. And it's not joined with any enemies. It's not getting any starvation on it. To me, that's a healthy moon. It has enough Shadbala to fulfill what it needs to do.
Right.
That's a healthy moon to me.
And so
but also looking at Vargas, too.
Right.
You know?
So Saturn's going to be the main planet that starves the moon.
Right.
Because it's the only planet that starves a planet that is with, when it's with it, right? But then on the other side of it, when the moon starves, say, Venus, or the moon starves Mercury, right?
Right, yeah.
We can think about that, and that's the starvation going the other direction, but still problematic.
It is.
Because it's taking that moon and it's putting too much of an emphasis on Venusian things or mercurial things, right? So when we're thinking about that, it's more Saturn starving the moon.
Right.
Or the moon starving these other two planets.
Exactly. We don't want the moon mixed with any pattern.
Right.
That's going to take it away from what it's supposed to do.
Right.
Which makes sense that the moon should be mostly alone. I mean, it is about that subjective consciousness.
Right, yeah.
So that's when a moon feels good. Even when you're just looking at a chart intuitively, when you see the moon placed that way, it feels like, okay, that's good. You know? The moon needs to have its space. It needs to have not too much going on with it, interacting with it, pulling it this way, that way. It shouldn't be doing that much in the chart in that sense either.
Right.
It's that part of the chart that's being. You know, the moon is about being.
Right, which kind of ties in, I don't know whether this is true or not, but we've discussed this for years, both in the Astrological Apprenticeship Program, with other students. But the thing that confuses people is, why is the moon exalted in Avashta where it's dead?
Oh, right.
Right?
Right.
And the idea that you just brought up about it not needing to do too much of anything.
Exactly.
Well, when you're in that kind of dead state, I suppose, you are more receptive to what's around you.
It's dead relative to how you're looking at that, right? It is dead in that sense, you know? Being, just being itself. That's the moon.
Not active.
Not active.
Yeah.
It's this passive.
And that's because the moon is a receptive planet, a feminine receptive planet. And that's, when it comes to psychology, I think that it's important to remember that there are certain planets that work well in active situations.
That's right.
And that's why Sun and Mars does so well in the 10th house. That is the house of activity. Those are masculine planets, and they've got Digbala there because now they can do what they need to be doing.
Exactly.
Whereas Venus and Moon, they've got Digbala closer to the fourth cusp, the fourth house. And that's because when it comes to a Venusian, more of a feminine, receptive nature, those planets work better when they can receive the good things versus working hard to make things happen.
That's right.
And that's a whole nother, I think that's a whole other topic.
It is.
Because that can really get into how to have a healthy, masculine nature.
And how to have a healthy feminine nature, which is the essential polarities of life that need to be balanced.
Right.
But the moon, even though it's, you could say just this feminine thing, has such an important role to play in that balancing act.
Exactly.
You know?
All right, well, so we've talked a little bit about the moon, and Rahu. There's plenty of things I'm sure we could get into for psychology. I mean, we could probably write thousands of novels or books on this. But Rahu and Ketu are the other series of principles that give a good glimpse into a person's psychology. Definitely. So how do they do that? So from your perspective as an Ayurvedic practitioner, as an astrologer, what does Rahu and Ketu reveal to you about someone's psychology?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand what Rahu and Ketu are all about, what they're doing. How do we understand what they actually are? So if the moon is our consciousness, then Rahu and Ketu are the nodes of the moon. Right. So there's apparent split in consciousness, this apparent fracture in consciousness. This two, where we're needing to feel a one, we're needing to feel whole and complete, but we have Rahu Ketu instead. That's splitting our consciousness into these two poles. Right. And they seem to be in contradiction to each other. Anywhere there's polarity, there's an apparent contradiction that needs to be resolved. So Rahu and Ketu are pointing to that duality in life that we're struggling with. Here I am, a separate being in a world. That is like core Rahu Ketu experience. That's an illusion. Right. That's why Rahu Ketu aren't even actually two. Right. So that's the first place I want to go to with it, is that Rahu Ketu are one. And the way that I see it psychologically is that Rahu Ketu are the unconscious. Mm-hmm. And if we look at the psychological perspective of the mind, it's divided into a tripartite structure. Mm-hmm. There's the unconscious, the subconscious, and then the conscious level of the mind. Mm-hmm. So I see Rahu Ketu as the unconscious level of the mind, the pattern itself that we're not aware of, that we're not integrated with.
Right.
And I see Rahu as being functioning as the subconscious structure, which is the means through which the unconscious is revealed and known. You know,
right.
So the unconscious is always surfacing to consciousness through that subconscious structure. Mm-hmm. You know, just like dreams are that subconscious structure by which the unconscious is communicating to us, showing us through symbols and imagery, right? So Rahu is revealing Ketu in that sense.
Okay, and we're thinking about Rahu and Ketu in regards to signs, in regards to houses, and I think probably for most people, they're going to relate more obviously to, say, Rahu and Ketu with a planet.
Right.
So when you're thinking about Rahu and Ketu with a planet, when these nodes are with a planet, what does that reveal about that planet psychologically? Right.
So Ketu is, any planet with Ketu is going to be where a person feels more comfortable, more secure. They build a security paradigm around the things of that planet. Mm-hmm. Because that's where they have karma. That's where they have an unconscious pattern. So on the one hand, it's a strength,
right?
But eventually they become disillusioned with that strength. So they use it too much.
They use it too much.
That's basically it. They use it too much.
And so, right, and I think that's an important point, because a lot of people talk about Ketu and they say you need to get away from your Ketu and develop Rahu.
Exactly.
And I think it's important to remember that just because you have a strength doesn't mean you don't use it.
Exactly.
It just means you don't just focus primarily on that one strength. It's like when you're in a relationship, you don't just keep doing the same thing to please your partner over and over again. You sort of have to learn and grow outside of that, you know, to keep it alive.
That's why I feel the key word with Rahu Ketu is integration.
Okay.
You know, it's not actually about trying to resolve an apparent contradiction, because there's no resolution to that paradox of that polarity of life.
Right.
You know, but it's about integrating. So it's something that's not integrated. When we use anything too much, we're not integrating with something else necessarily, right? So Rahu represents where that integration needs to happen, that which we need to now start to use.
Right.
And that's why if you start to really use your Rahu, you know, really go there, Ketu becomes more true.
Right.
You know? So with any planet joined with Rahu, they're not using it enough. They don't know how to use it. They don't understand it. It's obscured. It's shadowed.
Right.
So, and like we've been talking before, that like shadow and projection. You know, so Ketu, I was saying, is the shadow itself. Mm-hmm. You know, and Rahu is where a person, depending on how they deal with it, they're either going to project, you know, because the shadow is that part of us we can't quite accept and integrate with, so we project it into the environment, you know. We just spit it out, you know, like that's not a part of me, it's out there.
Right.
And so a person ends up compensating that way, you know, just projecting their unconscious.
So if we have, let's just talk about Ketu and say Mars.
Okay.
So that could be someone, you know, the idea is that maybe they've tried to be too forceful, they've tried to use their will too much, they've tried to rely too much on logic.
Right.
Now, Ketu and Mars can be extremely logical.
Right.
They can use their will very well, but because it's like the tool they always go to. Mm-hmm. You know, they've got a wrench, they've got a saw, but they're always picking up that hammer, even though it might not be appropriate to the situation.
Right.
Is that what you're thinking?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yeah.
And so then to balance it out, we'd look at kind of Rahu, how would we balance like a Ketu Mars through the Rahu focal point? What would a person do for that?
Well, Rahu is going to be inevitably challenging that whole Ketu paradigm, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going to use that. That's the interesting thing I've noticed, is that over time, people don't feel good about Ketu. Mm-hmm. They don't feel good using those things. They start to feel like it's not working.
Right.
You know, sensitive people in particular will feel like it's not working. So that's part of Rahu, the Rahu breakdown, you know. But I feel like it's going to cause them to use a different strategy, and one that they're not comfortable with. Right. Maybe strategy is not the right word here, but cause them to use a different tool, you know, that they're not used to using. So they're going to have to grab the wrench because they start to realize the hammer doesn't work anymore. It worked for so long, and now it doesn't work, you know. And so I'm going to have to grab this wrench. I don't really know how to use this wrench.
Right.
In fact, I've never even seen it before.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. I've never even seen this wrench.
What is this spanner?
But I'm going to have to use it, you know, and it's like, that's the only thing that works now, really. So that's sort of the Rahu experience, you know.
So the Rahu experience isn't necessarily that. It's that you have to use something new, but you're uncomfortable with it because you have no experience with it.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean you don't keep trying, because that's how you get the experience.
Exactly.
So it's the experience so Rahu draws you towards the experiences you need to help balance out that K2.
Exactly.
Right.
And in doing that, there's this incredible reflective process that goes on, and you start to realize something about that whole K2 paradigm. Like, oh God, you know, I've relied on this hammer for so long. It's like I don't even know what other tools are anymore.
Right.
And now when my hammer doesn't work, I'm like useless.
Right.
You know, it's like this doesn't work.
Right. And that's why people describe K2 as being sort of hyper-focused on things, because it just looks at this one particular tool, this one particular way of doing things. And that's why sometimes people have difficulty with Rahu, or when they describe Rahu, because Rahu is looking at all the possibilities, or Rahu is more open to doing things in a new and different way.
Exactly.
And the problem with doing things in a new, different way is you have a profound chance of really messing up.
You inevitably fail.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean you don't keep trying.
Exactly.
And that's the goal with Rahu, is to keep trying with the planet Rahu's with, the sign it's in, the house that it's in, and avashas it's associated with, and so on.
Exactly.
Right.
And through that, what's actually happening is something at the level of consciousness. You know, you're actually learning something about yourself in all of that, and how that's actually like the core paradigm that's ruling your whole life.
Right.
It's somehow wrapped up in all of this.
Right.
You know, because these are the lunar nodes. And so what ends up happening, I feel, through Rahu is that a person becomes whole. You know, Rahu is trying to actually sew up this fracture, but not really sew it up, actually to reveal that it's not actually a fracture. You know, we're fracturing it by using too much of the K2, right? Now we're like just getting farther and farther away, you know, farther and farther away, going down this rabbit hole.
Right.
But Rahu is saying, look, you don't have to do that. You know, it doesn't actually work. And like, you need to, if you're going to grow as a human being, and if you're going to grow spiritually, you need to enter this wholeness, you know, this integration,
Right.
you know, this totality.
Right. Which there's a lot of vulnerabilities in there.
A lot.
Yeah.
Which is the moon, again, like we were saying earlier, the moon, like I was saying that I feel the moon is really about being vulnerable. Moon Saturn, right? It's about being vulnerable. So the lunar nodes just point back to that. But the lunar nodes are showing the drama of this whole thing.
Right. And the difficulty with Rahu, so we touched a little bit on K2, but the difficulty with Rahu then would be, say, when we were discussing the sun earlier, and the sun and Rahu, that the person, they really want to use that sun well, but they don't necessarily know how, so they will often act really like they know how to use it, even though deep down inside there's a lot of uncertainty about that. So they
compensate.
They overcompensate for it, right? So the trick with having a planet with Rahu is more realizing that you do have to learn and grow through it, versus just acting like you already know what to do with it.
And that's a vulnerability too.
It is.
Because now you have to realize that compensating is just hiding.
Right.
So you can't compensate, but you don't actually know anything about this thing. So you just have to be seen. Right. You know, the emperor is naked. You know, that's Rahu with any planet, really. I feel, but it's going to come out chaotically. You know,
because you're just trying new things.
There's the cycle. There's a compensation cycle, and then there's the times when it doesn't work and it falls apart, even when you try to compensate.
Right.
So there's this chaos around it. It's just, but that's how you learn, right?
Yeah.
So you can't understand enough about Rahu to really get anywhere. That's what I say to people. It's like, look, I'm telling you all of this, but no matter how much you understand it intellectually or at any level, it's like it's not going to change anything really.
Right.
You have to go through the Rahu,
and you don't want to.
You don't want to, but that you have to submit to this.
Yes,
you know,
that's right. Okay, so we've been talking about the moon. We've talked a little bit about the nodes. One of the things that I wanted to touch upon was also the idea of the koshas. So this might be a brand new topic for a lot of people.
Sure.
I'm sure many people know about it, but from your experience, when you're thinking about the koshas and you're thinking about Ayurveda, you're thinking about astrology, at what level does astrology come into play with the koshas? And at what point in time are we, in a sense, needing to maybe leave astrology behind to develop maybe the more subtle koshas? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a trans-koshic understanding, you know. But I think I've contemplated the koshas in astrology a lot, and health in the koshas a lot.
Right.
So maybe we should just run through what are the 5 koshas. Where does this come from? So the 5 koshas are a paradigm of Vedanta, You know, Shankara is somebody who really championed talking about this in his Crest Jewel of Discrimination, Vivekachudamani. It's also described a lot in Panchadashi, which is also in the Shankara lineage. So this is the 5 koshas are describing the anatomy of the cosmos and the anatomy of the human being, from gross, subtle to causal. So the physical, the energetic, and the root, you know, the formless. And the 5 koshas are the way of seeing that in a more detailed fashion, especially relating to the human manifestation. So the idea behind the 5 koshas is that we're not just a physical body, we're not just an energy body, we're actually 5 layers manifesting in the spectrum of consciousness.
So what are those 5 layers? We start with the food sheath, right?
Food sheath, yeah. Annamaya kosha is the food sheath. So that's our physical body. That's what everybody agrees on, right? This exists.
You're right.
Then we have pranamaya kosha, which is the etheric body, which directly surrounds and pervades the physical body. So as we go deeper and deeper, we see that each function, each kosha has a senior function. So senior to the physical body is the energy body. That's what's animating the physical. Okay, so if the breath leaves, there's no life anymore.
Right.
So that's the pranic field, the etheric body, the energy body, the emotional force. Then we have the sheath of the lower mind, manomaya kosha. That's the manas, the sense mind.
That which perceives, or that which makes sense of what the body perceives.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So the mind, also the mind of thoughts, you know, that level of mind. Then we have vijnanamaya kosha. That's the 4th kosha. And that's the sheath of discriminative intellect. And the central will is also there. So this is an interesting one. I think of it in one word as the psyche. You know, you can also think of it as Atman. You know, that root, not even the root sense, but the first real sense of individual consciousness, the spark of divinity in the person. You know, the soul level of the person is that 4th kosha.
Right.
And the 5th, Anandamaya kosha, the bliss body, that's the causal sheath. That's at the root of manifestation. So it's actually not manifest. That's the potentiality from which all of the other sheaths are coming.
Right. So there's no sense of individualization in that sheath.
There's only the most subtle sense of it. You know, it's like it's not manifest. You know. Mm-hmm. But I think that there is a sense of, see, the 5th sheath is not enough for realization. Mm-hmm. All the sheaths have to be transcendent. But that 5th sheath is that root level of a sense of self. You know, it's not even cognized.
Right.
And that's why they say that, you know, my guru at least says that deep sleep is poor man's enlightenment.
Right.
Because there is no sense of object in that. But there's this most fundamental sense of still kind of existing, you know?
Right. And so with these sheaths, with these koshas, I'm assuming astrology impacts what, the first 4, or what do you?
Okay,
how do you
I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah.
You know, and you can think about this too.
Well, I've thought about it.
You have thought. All right. Okay, great.
So,
perfect. I've never talked to anybody else about this.
Okay, good.
So I'm looking at it like there's a planetary ruler for each sheath.
Okay.
So I'm saying that the food sheath is the sun.
Okay.
You also could say Saturn, though. When you get to the first of things, the beginning of cycles, it kind of gets tricky with the beginning and the end.
Right.
So Sun and Saturn are those 2 ends of the spectrum. So either one you can see at different levels there. Mm-hmm. The second sheath, the pranamaya kosha, is the moon. Mm-hmm. And manomaya kosha, the 3rd sheath of the mind, I'm saying is Mars.
Okay.
And then the 4th, the sheath of discriminative intellect, Mercury.
Mercury, right.
Yeah. It's interesting because Mercury is even called Buddha.
Right.
Right? That force of awakening, that soul level. The 5th, I'm saying is Jupiter.
Right. Greater understanding.
Yeah.
Infinite space.
Infinite space. Yeah. Okay. Ether, right? Jupiter has that function.
Right. Okay. Well, my thought about it, I've seen those broken down in that way before. I think David Frawley has one of his books, Ayurvedic Psychology. He did some of that. But I was always curious about the idea of, you know, astrology is impacting, you know, the physical body. Mm-hmm. It's impacting the emotional body. Mm-hmm. It's also impacting the mind.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start getting to, say, the deeper intellect, and the fourth sheath, that is a level that permeates all these things.
That's right.
It's not necessarily influenced by them, but is...
Well, it's above them, for sure.
Right.
Because it's senior in the hierarchy.
Right. So my thought was that the easier, or not easier, the more time spent moving through these sheaths, because they have to be... you can't just focus on one.
Right.
Because we have all these sheaths.
Exactly.
But the more we're able to maybe identify with or realize our root in the fourth sheath and beyond, then the astrological influences, they still impact us, but we realize we're not them.
Right.
Where, a sense of freedom comes in that regard.
I agree with you. And the way I look at it also from a medical perspective is that medicine can only deal with the first three sheaths.
Right, yes.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't impact beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And I see different modalities. That's why I use so many different modalities. Like I do homeopathy, I do Ayurveda, I do energy healing.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, each of those touch a different sheath. I think most of Ayurveda that we're talking about, like you're changing your diet, your lifestyle, you're taking herbs, you're just working with the food body.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's good.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's some parts of Ayurveda that go into the energy,
Mm-hmm.
It's not as pronounced, though, as the food body focus, digestive fire and all of that. But the Agni is at every level.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So the energy therapies deal with the pranamaya kosha, balancing that energy sheath. Then you have things like homeopathy that I feel really touch that third sheath more, or psychotherapy, or astrology readings.
Right.
Now I also feel like astrology readings can get at that fourth level sometimes.
How's that?
Well, I think it's rare. Yeah. But I feel like there's something about astrology that can go a step beyond medicine, which is that something can shift in a person's consciousness at the level of their understanding of life. They're not just changing their thoughts. It's like there's actually something deeper that's shifting in them through an astrology reading when they're getting that reflection back to them, like this is the pattern.
Right. They get a sense of validation or knowing about what they're going through, and it becomes more of a conscious thing versus just an unconscious pattern.
And the evolution of that is the sense that I'm not that. It's like this is just patterns.
Right.
There's no identity in the pattern, right? Like I don't feel like astrology is actually about any identity at all. We're just talking about patterns interacting. Right,
but it's hard to convey that to someone.
Well, you can't.
Right, because when we look at that sheath, the bliss sheath, when spiritual teachers or realized people talk about not being influenced by karma, it doesn't mean that their body isn't going to have something happen to it.
The body has to die.
Exactly.
Right?
It doesn't mean
it's a karmic manifestation.
Right. It doesn't mean they don't have a particular kind of mental structure.
Right.
It means that they're identified with that sense of ground of being, and when they're identified with that, they know that these things rise and fall all the time. So I think it's an important point to point out or to make that the idea of being free of karma doesn't mean that while you're here, things don't still happen to you.
Oh, absolutely not. It's a purification.
Right.
But I think if you can awaken that fourth sheath disposition, that's happening at the level of you're seeing that, this is all just patterns happening.
Right. It's like
so the correspondence is release you.
Yes.
And then you stand at a different level relative to it. And that's why I feel like, especially like in the non-dual traditions, both in Buddhism and in Hinduism, there's non-dual traditions. They're basically advocating standing in the causal position, standing in the causal sheath. And that being the senior-most sheath, that's how you purify the karmas,
right.
It's like your karmas are getting purified by standing at the root of the whole thing, and that's the most disidentified.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you're not going through stuff.
Right, and that's why they use the example of the dreamer realizing you're the dreamer.
Right.
When you're caught up in the dream, of course you think when you get your leg chopped off that it's the most horrible thing in the world. But once you realize that you are actually the dreamer, well, you know that that's just part of the pattern playing itself out. And this is not an easy thing at all to come to terms with. So we're not trying to make light of it. We're trying to
not
talk
at all
in a dumb way like a lot of people do, like just know that you're the dreamer.
That is so insufficient.
Yeah, you can't do that.
That is so insufficient.
It's good to think that way every now and then to remind yourself. But, there's an actual, that's why meditation has developed yoga to come to the actual experience of it, which is possible, but it takes work.
There's actually like a transfiguration in the vehicle of manifestation that has to happen.
Right.
Like my guru says that it's enlightenment of the whole body, it's a total yogic process. It's not a mental attitude.
Right.
It's not just a shift in your understanding. It's like, that's why I think the fourth sheath is about this psychic awakening, you know, the soul level awakening. And maybe we haven't gotten there yet with astrology. But what I'm trying to say is I feel like there's a potential in astrology to kind of reach that level in the right person, you know?
I'll go with it. But my sense is that, you know, by focusing on the meditation and the yoga practice, then the astrology is irrelevant.
Totally.
You know,
I can see that.
So I
agree with you.
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to look at astrology to, if they can look at it that way, to give them a sense of knowing what they really are and what their patterns are. But you can't just, I don't think you can just do that with astrology.
No, okay. I agree. Let clarify this. I think astrology can help a person really effectively deal with the first three sheaths and get something of that fourth sheath. But the way that you deal with fourth sheath things is spiritual thing. You know, that's meditation, that's yoga, that's, you know, relationship to a guru. You know, that's where the psychic awakening really happens in relation to.
Right.
So I totally agree with you there. We're moving beyond astrology.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I think that might. I feel like we could go on talking for a while.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll have to save that for another time.
Sure.
Because I would like to get into this a little more with you.
Sure. But to tie it back to psychology.
Yeah.
So I think when we're talking psychology, we're talking about the third sheath primarily. And so when you're looking at someone's chart from an Ayurvedic perspective, you're looking at their psychology, which helps you understand this third sheath level of awareness, right?
So that you know how to better relate to the person, or how to teach them how to better relate to themselves and their own patterns. Is that what we're getting at here?
That's what we're getting at, and it's important when you're looking at a chart to see where are the issues for this person.
Right.
Are they primarily dealing with food body stuff? You know, maybe I just need to tell them, like, you know, you just need to eat better.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
And for other people, maybe there's just an energy vitiation. They're just very energy sensitive. Their life force isn't flowing well.
Right.
You need to deal with it at that level, you know? And maybe it's actually psychological, which actually always there's psychology at the root of it because it's a senior sheath, right? So anything that's wrong there, it's going to be patterning down.
Right.
Anything wrong that's body level is going to be patterning up. So I think I use this to see like what's happening at the person where. Right. What do I need to deal with, you know, in this moment, you know, or in that moment.
Right.
But also I think you can look at the Vargas relating to sheaths too, which is a whole other
thing.
We won't get into that.
We'll get into that for another time.
But
that's good.
That's the utility of it, in other words. That's what I'm trying to express, the utility of this paradigm.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Sure, man.
We're here on vacation at the Kala headquarters. But what is your website again so people can get in touch with you? My website is atmaastrology.com. ATMAastrology.com. Okay, so if you want to get in touch with Neeshee, he does some good work. I've already referred at least one of my clients to him. Contact him through his website. Ideally, probably in a month or two, we'll discuss setting up an introductory to Ayurveda and astrology class that we'll end up doing together as a webinar. And those of you who are interested in exploring the astrological apprenticeship program through Ayurvedic Astrology, again, go to Ayurvedicastrology.com and check it out. And I think that everyone who studies astrology should have a little bit of knowledge about Ayurveda and vice versa, because they're meant to be practiced together. Again, that might be another video that we get into. So
sure.
Thanks again for
having me.
Yeah, it's good.
Poke a hole at the top. It's a small opening. You don't want to break it. The whole thing in half. That's a pretty good hole. Because you get a good hole like this, and then you want to put in, like I was saying, the earth element stuff first, so the heavy stuff, and the water is last. And then you eat the whole thing. All in one go.
You want to show us how to do it?
Just watch the demonstration of fire. Where's the fire?
Fire is in all of it, and in your belly.
The fire is that spicy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's the chutney because of fire.
So you fill it all the way full with
milk? It has air in it. Yeah, well, you know, fill it up as you like, and then you want to leave room for the chutneys. That's where the flavor is.
Put the potato in.
Yeah, potato first.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't leave enough room.
It's just your hole's not big enough. We need like a straw to like.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Like pull it out a little bit.
You just kind of work it, you know. You just work it.
In there, drop it in.
Yeah,
like that.
I filled it too full.
See, I got a nice little base there. Now I'm going to put some chutney.
Yeah, and then you have to scratch your face, and some wipe your hands off before going for another.
Is this the same thing as that? What is this?
Yeah, that's onion free.
Oh, onion free. I just took the onion one. Oh well.
Oh my goodness.
My brain hemispheres are screwed.
Not gonna be as quick.
That's too big, too much.
That was
Chutney.
delicious.
And then, yeah. Did you get the water? Okay, that's key.
Your brain hemispheres are screwed, you say?
Okay, so what do you put in?
Screwdriver.
You put in a little bit of everything?